Any testimony you give the court is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. You'll have a seat over there, please. You'll state your names and identify on the record.
My name is Roberta Thornsberry, Thornsberry.
Good afternoon, Ms. Thornsberry.
Good afternoon.
Just, if you would, just tell the jury who you are.
I'm Timothy Ray Jr.'s grandmother.
And that would make you the great grandmother of who?
Yes. Tamara, Elaine, Natan,
Gabe.
and Gabe.
Yes, ma'am. You took the stand a little bit earlier today. We had a hearing, and based on that hearing, we're gonna start at a point of your life when you got together with Larry Thornsberry. Is that okay?
That's okay.
All right. And he's your current husband.
Yes.
How old were you when you and Larry got married?
18?
Okay. And you're still with Larry today?
Yes.
Okay. But your relationship had its problems early on, right?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
And based on various things that were going on in your life at that time, with some drugs and alcohol involved with your relationship with Larry and your lives, right?
Yes.
Sometimes that bubbled over into violence between y'all.
Yes.
And one time you all actually got divorced, right?
Yes.
While you were divorced, did you marry somebody else?
I did.
Who was that?
Phil Caliendo.
Caliendo? But you and Larry ended up getting back together after that.
Yes.
If you would tell the jury a little bit about your son, who you call Big Tim, right?
Yes.
And that's Timmy's dad.
Right.
And Timmy's mom, Cynthia, when they got together, they were living with you, right?
Yes.
And how old were they? Do you remember?
They were, I think, 19.
Okay. And when Cynthia was pregnant with Timmy, they were living with you, right?
Yes.
And tell the jury, if you would, about things that you started noticing about Cynthia when she became pregnant with Timmy.
She just, she went to herself. She was more like alone. She would go to the room, and she wouldn't come out of her room after my son would go to work. He would come home and ask where she was at, and I would think she was there because I never would see her go out. And come to find out, she would crawl through windows and leave. And then one time he came home and couldn't find her, and she was in the closet cutting up all of her clothes, had all of her clothes cut up and was hiding in the closet. Just strange things. She was nutty. Nutty's fruitcake, bedbug, whatever you want to call it. But there was something going on.
But you cared about her.
I did. I loved her.
And if you would tell the jury about once Timmy's born, how did you see Cynthia's interactions with Timmy as an infant?
It was just, once again, it was a strange relationship. I was a mother, so I never seen her to be the mother that we normally are. You know how you cuddle your babies, if they cry, you run to them immediately. She didn't do those things. She would let him lay and cry. She would let him lay in urine, and I would have to attend to him. And then she would tell me, I wish he would just shut the fuck up. I mean, she didn't even want to hear him cry. She didn't really want any part of him.
And when she said that, and of course, everybody excuse our language, but when she said she wished Timmy would shut the fuck up, he was an infant.
Yes.
In terms of other things that she did to Timmy when he was an infant, in terms of dressing him and things, will you tell the jury about that?
Oh, it would be 90 degrees outside, and she would put him in flannel jeans and a flannel shirt with a t-shirt. And I'd be telling her, Cindy, it's so hot, he would be sweating. His little hair would be wet with sweat. And she'd say, he needs to be covered. His body needs to be covered. She would bath him in cold water. She would give him laxatives to cleanse his body. She would not feed him because she didn't want a fat baby. I mean, she just let him cry constantly.
And did you ever get to the point where you thought it was unsafe for Timmy to be in her care?
Oh, I did.
And did you sometimes not know where she was with Timmy?
Lots of times I didn't know where she was at with him.
Eventually, Big Tim had Cynthia committed, is that right?
Yes,
And when I say committed to what?
a mental part of the hospital.
Okay. And that was as a consequence, I guess, of the things that you told the jury about.
Right.
Big Tim and Cynthia's relationship obviously started falling apart.
Very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Was there, did they begin to fight and argue over custody of Tim?
I didn't see that part, but I know there was a lot of it because Tim would find her and he would bring little Tim back, and then she would come back for a day or so, and as soon as he would go back to work or something, she would take little Tim and off she'd go again, and then he might not find her for another week or so. I mean, it was just on and off.
Yes, ma'am. And did Big Tim eventually get custody of little Tim?
Yes.
And did the police eventually have to get involved because of the custody issue?
Yes.
Can we tell the jury about that?
Her and her sister came to my house and they were going to kidnap little Tim. And she was upstairs talking with me, and while the sister said she needed to go to the bathroom, and she went into the bathroom and tried to crawl. She crawled out the window with the baby and was going over the fence in my yard, and my daughter stopped her, and the police were called, and her and Cynthia both were arrested. And we had little Tim, though. She didn't get to take it in that time.
And he would have been about how old at that point?
Probably at that time, he was probably maybe a year and a half old, 2, somewhere in that area.
When Big Tim gets legal custody of Timmy, that sort of means by default that you have custody of little Timmy too, because you're one of the.
They were with me, and I watched Timmy when my son worked.
Okay. So at that point, you're the closest thing that he has to a mother. Is that
Yes.
As he's growing up with you and Big Tim and Larry, of course, right? And other family members.
Right.
There still is in your family, based on a variety of issues, people have issues with alcohol and drugs, right?
Right.
And there are times when it bubbles over into violence.
Yes.
And in the sort of the mid-1980s, as Tim's growing up, there are times that the police have to come to the house, right?
Yes.
And that's for things like fighting,
Yes.
and at least on one occasion, a shooting,
Yes.
and issues involving drugs, right?
Yes.
And those are things that Timmy was around as a young kid.
Yes.
Now, I know you've told me in the past one of the strengths of your family is that people can get into very heated fights and arguments, and then they get over it, right?
Correct.
Who in your family could sort of do that?
Little Tim.
All right. And why do you think that was?
He just had his own little way, you know. If things didn't go his way, then he didn't like you that day. He didn't talk to you.
So would he shut down?
Yeah, he'd shut down.
Did he seem more sensitive and delicate to you than other people?
He was very sensitive when he was little.
Did he talk to you a lot about where his mom was?
He asked a lot for his mom.
And at that point, I guess you didn't have any idea where Cynthia was.
I didn't.
What about Timmy growing up and friends? Did he have a lot of friends?
He didn't have a lot of friends, no. No, not a lot. He was more to himself.
Do you remember having birthday parties for him where friends came over?
Not so much friends, but we had such a large family that we didn't We didn't have to invite friends. We'd have 20, 25 kids just with the family.
Tell the jury about your impression of Tim growing up in terms of his, I know you always say he's smart, but about him being sort of gullible and
He was, but he was so intelligent. He was smart. And he was just, he believed, so much,
Did you get the impression that he just would believe things though without investigating very much? I think you told me about
Yes, he would.
infomercials.
He would, he even believed that you could feed the VCR. He would try to feed it dog food because it had an opening on it. That was a mouth. I'm like, no, that's not a mouth. You cannot feed the VCR dog food. So he had,
Who was Elaine? Tell the jury who Elaine.
Elaine was my daughter.
And how far apart in age were Elaine and Tim?
2 years.
Okay. So they were close, I guess, growing up.
Yes.
And tell the jury what happened to Elaine.
Elaine died of cancer when she was 29.
Timmy was about 13.
Yes.
Was that a pretty big blow to your family?
Oh, yes.
And I think I'm right that your daughter Elaine, who died, became the reason why Timmy and Amber decided to call Abigail Elaine. Is that right?
Yes.
When your daughter Elaine died, she had 3 children.
Yes.
And what happened to those 3 children?
It was a nasty court battle. I fought their father for custody, and the judge basically said he wasn't a good dad, but he was their dad. It was all they had, so he put the kids back with him, but I ended up literally getting the kids later because as they got older and they started getting in trouble, he would just drop them off one by one.
Did you have some problems with their dad?
Oh, yes, I had to get an order of protection against him. He would call me up and threaten me that he was going to kill me and numerous things.
And that was a time when Timmy was living with you, right?
Yes. Well, Timmy wasn't living with me, but he lived close to me. He was there a lot.
Okay. Because he was back and forth, I guess, from your house to Big Tim's.
Right.
You remember the car accident that Timmy got in when he was 15?
Yes.
And tell the jury what you remember about that.
I just remember my son telling me, Mom, Tim's been in a bad accident, and we went to the hospital, and then he appeared to be okay as far as we knew.
Yeah. And did you think that Timmy changed from the car accident?
Not really. I just thought Timmy was becoming a teenager. I seen the place on his head that never went away. I was always concerned about that, but my son assured me that the doctor said that he was okay.
Yes, ma'am. And so, the things that may have changed about him, you attributed to being a teenager.
Right. I mean, Tim did a lot of silly things, but it was always like, he's getting older. It's just part of growing up.
Yes, ma'am. But before, he'd been a good student, sort of a
He was always a good student.
Yeah. And then afterwards, he had a little trouble more in school. And you knew that he got arrested for some things.
Yes.
And you knew that he tried to get into the Navy, right?
Yes.
And was that a strange choice, did you think, for him?
The Navy?
Yes, ma'am.
No, because he was, he wanted to be, something special.
Yes, ma'am.
So it wasn't a strange choice. I was just shocked that I never knew why he got out of the Navy.
Yes,
I mean, I always was told from him that it was something to do with his ear because he couldn't hear. I did not realize that it was because of mental conditions. I didn't know that until just recently.
Yes, ma'am. Timmy goes to prison for the things that he was arrested for, right? I'm sorry. Ms. Thornsberry, just say yes or no so that the court. Was that a yes?
Yes.
Okay. And tell the jury that biggest change you see when Timmy comes out of prison? What's the biggest change in him to you?
The religion.
And tell the jury what you mean by that.
When he came out of prison, it was just like everything was about the Bible. I mean, he couldn't talk to you without it being involved in the Bible. He would tell me, you know, the church I was going to, the religion I believed in, I wasn't going to get to heaven, that I needed to go to the type of religion that he was in. I needed to learn how to speak in tongues. And I just told him, I don't believe in that. You know, that's not the way I was brought up. So, I mean, but he really tried to force the religion. It was just constantly, it was religion.
And was he aggressive about the way that he presented it to you?
At times, yes.
And do you remember him speaking in tongues?
Yes.
And I think in the past you told me that you felt like he had been pulled in by a cult.
I did. That's the way I totally felt.
And did you get the feeling as though he thought that he had a superior knowledge to other people about religion?
Yes.
What about reading the Bible to the kids? I think by that point, Mira and Eli were born.
He read the Bible to his children all the time. I mean, there was, you know, they weren't allowed to watch TV. They weren't allowed to listen to music and stuff. I mean, it was all religion.
And do you remember thinking to yourself that you thought the kids might like some normal kids' books?
Well, I remember I wanted to buy Mira some little capris and little shirts for the summer, and he literally told me to go to the part of the store I was at and look at the restroom and tell me what I seen on the doors. And I'm like, I see stick people. He says, what do they have on? I'm like, well, you know, the little boys got like pants on, I guess, and the little girls like a dress on the women's washroom. And he says, that's because that's what they're supposed to wear, Grandma. And I just thought that was, you know, so strange.
Yes, ma'am. Did you talk to him about your concerns about his religious beliefs?
There was no talking to Tim about what he believed in religion, no.
Did he, what did he do? He would just shut down?
He shut down and wouldn't talk to me for a while.
If you would, Miss Thornsberry, tell the jury about a visit with Cynthia down in Mississippi. And Cynthia, again, is Timmy's biological mom.
Yes.
But none of you had seen her since when?
I had not seen her since he was like 2.5 years old, 2 years old. And he just kept insisting, in his mind, he thought that his dad and I had hid her away from him and wouldn't let him see her. And I always tried to tell him, this is not true, Tim. Your mom was sick. But he wouldn't have it. So finally, somehow I found out where she was at in Syracuse, New York. And so I called there and I talked to the hospital, and they told me that I couldn't talk to her, but they would get a message back to her, and she called us. And then my son arranged for her to come to Mississippi to see little Tim. So she came to Mississippi to see little Tim, but when she got there, he didn't want no part of her, because he's seen just how sick she was, and he didn't want her around his kids. So she ended up staying at my house for like 5 or 6 days, because that's where she wanted to stay. I mean, and I slept in my room with a chair up against my door. I was afraid of her.
How'd she look to you?
She looked, when she got off of the bus, she had on men's trousers and had a like rope tied around them, and a man's shirt and men's shoes. And she was very, very heavy, overweight. She just looked like she had just never been taken care of.
Did you recognize her at all as the Cynthia that you'd known back in
No.
1980? At this time, you were living in Mississippi around this time with
Correct.
Right? And your son, Big Tim, is living in Mississippi as well.
Correct.
and little Tim and Amber are living in Mississippi.
Right.
And they have Mira, Eli, and Natan at that point.
I'm not sure if they had, yeah, they did have Natan, I think.
Yeah. And they live down in Starkville, Mississippi, I believe, right?
At that time, I think they were still in Fulton, Mississippi.
Okay.
I could be wrong, but I think it was Fulton.
But they would come sometimes to Amory, where you lived, to visit, right?
Yeah.
And tell the jury about the visits and who liked to come spend the night at your house.
Oh, well, he wouldn't let any of the children spend the night with us. But when the summer came that he was no longer with Amber and the kids came down, my son would let the kids come and spend the night with me. Mira would come and she'd bring her little backpack and, you know, her little pajamas and stuff. And she would spend the night. Eli would come. He would spend the night the next night. And then it would be Natan's turn. And Natan would come over and he would stay for a little while. And then he'd say, Granny, I want to go back to my papa's house at the big house. I want to go to my papa's. And he wouldn't stay, and I'd have to call my son Timothy to come and pick him up.
Because that's who Natan was talking about, his papa, his big
Papa.
Tim.
Papa, we called him Papa.
Yes, ma'am. Will you tell the jury about Eli's garden at your house?
Eli, he would come and spend the night with me, and he would stay in the daytime with me. This one time, we were doing some yard work, and I had a lot of little pavers and stuff. And he's like, Granny, let's build a garden. And I'm like, okay, let's build a garden. So he carried all the rocks, and he put them all around this tree. And now we call it Eli's garden.
Okay.
And he worked so hard at this little garden. And he picked all the weeds out of it. And we planted the flowers. And now there's 5 little angels in that garden.
It's all right. Take a deep breath.
So this line of questioning is not relevant to what we're reporting.
Sean, I didn't hear what Sean did.
He says not relevant to what we're presenting on right now.
I'm going to move on. Just
Okay.
talk to you.
Fair enough. I sustain the objection
Yes, sir.
going forward.
Matt from the
Yes, you may.
All right. Mr. Thornsberry, I'm just going to ask you to identify some parameters if you can identify some pictures and not put on some numbers on it for the rest of that. But this would be defendants marked for identification purposes: 139, 140, 141, 142, 144, 146, 148, 149, 150, 151, 152, 157, 158, 160, 162, 163, and 164. Are those pictures that you looked at before?
Yes,
And are these
family pictures.
family pictures? Thank you. I would offer the evidence. Permission to publish these before.
Subject to objection we made in our hearing as to relevance, your objection's noted. They are be allowed in over that objection.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Thornsberry, I'm just going to put some pictures up on the screen, and if you'll just tell the jury who's in the picture and anything that comes to your mind about that person or that time. Is that all right?
Yes. That is Cindy. That's little Tim's mother.
And do you remember where that picture was taken?
That picture was taken at my house. That was her baby shower
Baby shower for little.
for little Tim.
All right. That's 139. This is 140. Who's that?
That is my son Timothy and little Tim.
Okay. This is 141. Who's that?
That is my son Timothy and Cindy and little Tim and somebody's head there. I think that was at a Thanksgiving dinner.
But that little Tim is the
That's little Tim sitting in Cindy's lap, yes.
How about that?
That's my son and little Tim.
All right.
Number 142.
I'm sorry, 142, yes, sir. And this is 144. Who's that?
That's little Tim and myself.
And where was that taken?
That was taken out on the boat. We were boating.
Yes, ma'am. This is 146. Who's in that picture?
That is my son Larry and little Tim playing around at my house.
And that's little Tim in front?
That's little Tim in the front, yeah.
And
Larry Jr. in the back.
And tell the jury about Larry Jr.
Larry Jr. got killed when he was 23 in a motorcycle accident.
That was 146. How about, this is 148. Who's that?
That's my sister and Mira.
Right? And was that at your house?
Yes.
And this is 149. And I think you talked about this, but
Oh, that's little Tim, Amber, Mira, Eli, and that's Cindy.
that's
That's his mother.
Okay.
That's when she came to my house.
Yes, ma'am. And I think 150 is just another picture from that,
That's
is it?
little Tim, his mother, and Eli and Mira.
And this is 151. Tell the jury who's in this.
That is Jackie, my granddaughter, and that is Mira. I think Eli's over on this end. That's Natan, and that's Gabe that she's holding.
Gabe's the little,
And that's myself.
right. That's somebody's birthday?
I think it was my birthday or I don't know. It was somebody's birthday. I think they were all singing happy birthday to me.
And this is your home in Mississippi?
Yes.
All right. I'm going to show you 152. Who's that?
That's Mira and myself.
And how about 157? Who's that?
That's Mira.
At your house?
That's at my house, yes.
And who's in the red there?
That's Amber.
I'm going to show you now 160. Who's, I know it's a little blurry, but tell the jury.
That is myself and Elaine.
Where were you?
This was in Atlanta.
And 162.
That is my husband. That is all the great grandbabies and myself. We're all in the bed together.
But Elaine,
This is in Atlanta.
that's the same from Atlanta as well?
Yes.
Elaine's not in that picture though.
No, Elaine wasn't in there. She was asleep on the sofa.
And then the last one I want to show you is 164, which I think is the same trip. But is that everybody?
That's the same trip, and that's with my husband. That's all of us in Atlanta, yes.
Right. The trip to Atlanta, that was in August of 2014, is that right?
Yes.
And that was very close to the time of the babies, as I think your family referred to them the baby.
The trip to Atlanta was, we went there to meet Tim and the grandbabies. And first of all, he was late showing up, and we waited. And then when I seen him, he had lost so much weight. And he had on a hot pink shirt. And his shirt was drenched with sweat. And I'm like, why are you sweating like this? And then he was drinking, and he was smoking cigarettes. And I had never seen this from him before. I had never seen him drinking. And then we went there, and him and my husband went to get pizza because everything was closed. And they walked to get the pizza, and Tim came back. And he said he was gonna get the car and go back and pick up my husband. Well, my husband called and asked me, he says, where's little Tim? I'm like, well, I don't know, he come to get you. And so my husband walked back, and little Tim showed up after that. And once again, he was just so wet with sweat and just, I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what. I mean, just an intuition that you know something wasn't right, but you couldn't put your finger on it. And we tried to get him to let us bring the youngest children home with us because he was supposed to come down the end of that month or the next month, somewhere in there. But anyway, we tried to get him to let us bring the ones that weren't in school. And he told me, he says, Grandma, I can't be away from my babies. And he wouldn't let us bring them.
He told the jury about when he came back to the hotel late that night, what he said about Elaine.
Well, he asked if we'd watched the kids while he went out that night, and I'm like, well, yeah. And then the next morning, he was there, and he says, Grandma, he says, you're not a very good babysitter. He says, I came back at 3:30, and Elaine was behind the couch screaming and crying. And I'm like, really? And I, didn't go into great details with him. But then I asked my husband, I'm like, Larry, was Elaine not in the bed with us? And he said, Roberta, Elaine was in the bed with us. She wasn't in the living room screaming and crying. He said she took a nap in there, but after that, he says, Elaine slept when we got ready to go to sleep. We put her in here too.
Ms. Thornsberry, if you thought that the children were in any danger, you'd have done something.
Oh, I would have, yes. I would have, if I had had to fight him or whatever, call the police or whatever, I would have, never let him touch those kids if I thought they were in danger.
Yes, ma'am. May I approach again, ma'am?
Right.
Ms. Thornsberry, I just want to show you what the mark for identification purposes has been exhibit number 138. Do you recognize that?
Yeah,
I think
that's a video of Atlanta.
of the trip that you were just describing.
Yes.
Your Honor, I ask you to move defense exhibit 138 into evidence and publish it as well.
No objection.
No objection to 138.
Do you remember who's in this video for the most part? Do you remember, Ms. Thornsberry?
The grandkids, little Tim, myself, and my husband.
Before we play it, I guess that's little Tim in the pink.
That's the pink shirt I was describing, yes.
And then who's on the couch there?
That's me with Elaine, and Mira's in front of her dad.
And are you and your husband Larry the only members of the family that ever met Elaine?
Yes.
All right, we're gonna play it if that's all right with Your Honor.
For radiance, you need strength and faith. So for radiance oil, I use new True. In just 1 day, it cleans, whitens your hair, and strengthens enamel. It's truly radiant. I just assumed I was getting rushed for food that had one as the first ingredient. It was one of the big name brands I've had for years. Chicken wine. That's why I switched them to Blue. And dog foods, things like chicken fried pork. You know, I talk about feeding my Jake like he's a member of the family. This isn't exactly what I feel like.
Ouch! When pet parents learn the truth about pet dog foods, they switch to Blue Buffalo. All Blue Life Protection foods are made with the finest natural ingredients of Blue first.
I know it's tough, Ms. Thornsberry, but I appreciate you sharing your memories with the jury. And I think somebody from the state might have some questions for you, okay?
Thank you.
Graham.
Thornsberry, I'm sorry you have to be here today.
Thank you.
The video that we just watched, that was in Atlanta. in
Yes.
August. Do you know when in August that was?
I think it was like August the 3rd.
August the 3rd?
It was early August.
And your grandson, Tim, had come and met you all in Atlanta.
Yes.
How many days did you all spend there?
Pardon me?
How many days did you spend there?
Did we stay there?
Yes, ma'am.
Just overnight?
Just that one night? Took the kids to the aquarium?
No, we kind of thought we were going to go somewhere with him on Sunday, but when he got up Sunday morning, he was ready to leave. He had already checked us out. He was ready to leave. We had breakfast and then he left.
And I think I read somewhere that he was drinking that night.
He was drinking that night, yes.
That was something new that you hadn't seen.
Right.
Since then, you've learned that he was smoking spice. Since
I have heard that, yes.
you didn't know that at the time.
No, sir.
Was he smoking cigarettes at the time?
Yes, sir.
Did he ever explain to you where he went during the time that he disappeared and left your husband at the pizza place?
No, sir.
So you don't know what he was doing?
No, sir.
When he came to Atlanta, did he seem happy to see you?
Yes, sir.
And you were happy to see
Oh, yes.
your great grandbabies?
Yes.
And how did Tim get along with your husband?
Very good.
They got along well?
Very well.
Tim was happy to see him?
Oh, yes.
And Tim, I saw in the video, it looked like there was a lot of noise. I guess the TV was on.
If they were playing music,
So that's what Tim was paying attention to, I guess.
probably.
But he did play with the children, right?
Yes, he did.
And he smiled and he laughed.
Yes.
So since Tim was born, honestly, you've been his mother.
Tried to be.
You've done the best you could.
Yes.
Tim Sr., his dad, loves Tim.
Very much.
The whole family loves him.
Yes.
In fact, he said that he didn't have a lot of friends, but he's had so much family.
Right. We had a large family.
And there may have been some chaotic times, but there were a lot of good times too, weren't there?
More good than bad.
There was a question about the car wreck when he was 15, and you remember that, and he got that skull fracture.
I do.
And as far as his intelligence, the way he behaved, and how he interacted with people, you didn't really see a difference in the way he was after the wreck
Well,
before the wreck, is what I heard.
He was different after the wreck, but I think that's because he had gotten in trouble with his dad and just, he was getting older. So, he was a teenager.
15 going on 20.
Right. So,
Earlier, I heard you say that he was special and he could do anything he wanted. Is that right?
he was.
He was very goal-oriented. He would set a goal for himself, and then he would work to make it happen. Correct?
Yes.
He went to school. He did well. He succeeded.
Very well in school.
Very smart. There's no question. Very smart.
Very smart. We were very proud of him.
Very proud of him when he graduated with
Very
honors
proud of him.
from Mississippi State.
So proud of him as a person, as a father. He was a great person.
Was he the first one to graduate from college?
Pardon me?
Was he the first to graduate from
Yes.
college? And then when he got his job at Intel,
My husband was so proud to just drive by that place.
and you knew he was working as a validation engineer, I'm sure he told you, right?
Yes.
Part of the team.
Oh, he would try to explain it to me.
You never heard of him get in trouble, any kind of behavior problems at work
No,
or in college?
no, sir.
When he married Amber and wanted to have a good marriage. That was one of the goals I think he told you.
They appeared to be very happy.
You said that after he came out of prison, though, I guess he found religion,
Yes,
and that his beliefs were different than how you all had raised him.
right.
And you mentioned something about a cult, but I mean,
To me, it was just, he was so into the religion. It was just, he'd eat, drink, and sleep it. There was just, you couldn't go swimming, you couldn't do this, you couldn't do that. It was just, to me, it was a lot.
it was a lot.
Right.
But he still, during that, how old was he during that time?
God, maybe 25.
So was he working at the time?
I think he was going to school after he came out of prison. He started to go back to school, and he was working. He met Amber, yeah.
So he became very religious with very conservative views, but he also was going to school, working, and was married.
Yes.
Do you remember filling out an affidavit for the Department of Mental Health, Ms. Thornsberry?
Do I remember filling it out for
Mhm.
myself, or?
I have a document with your signature on it.
I don't have my glasses. I remember signing it.
You don't remember signing it?
I do
Oh,
remember.
you do remember signing it. I think the Department of Mental Health had sent you a questionnaire and asked you to fill it out. Does that sound?
That sounds about right, yeah.
One of the things that is noted in here is, there was a question about aggression. And your answer was he had normal tantrums like any other kid, but he wasn't aggressive at all. He was kind as a child. And I'm on the second page if you want to.
He was kind as a child. I mean, yes, he had to be the center of attention, but he was, he was kind.
And he wanted to obey the rules.
Yeah, he obeyed the rules, yes. Till he became to a certain age, like any other child, and
There was a question about mental health problems he had, and your answer was, not that I know of, that he ever went to the doctor for.
I didn't know of it, no.
If you would have seen something, you would have done something about it, wouldn't you?
Well, as he got older, he wasn't around me much. I mean, if he was talking to his dad, he didn't talk to me. If he talked to me, he didn't talk to his dad. As he got older, after he got with Amber, it was like, it was all about Amber and the kids. And
Did Tim talk to you about problems that he had
as far as what,
when he was growing up?
talked a lot about, he'd cry a lot about not having a mom. Mother's Day, why didn't his mom love him? Things like that.
Things that bothered him, he would talk to you about.
Yeah.
You noted that he never told you that he heard any voices. He never said to you that he heard voices, did he?
No, he never told me that.
Did he ever tell you that the children were trying to harm him?
Make little comments every once in a while, like sometimes, Grandma, I think they're out to get me. But, you know, just that's kind of a normal comment to me.
Joking comments.
Yeah.
He never told you that he was really afraid of his children, did he?
No.
There's a note in the answer form, which I'm on like the third page now, where it says page 11, it's asking you some questions about the trip to Atlanta. And it said he got up early the next morning, was ready to go. He seemed like he was in a hurry to leave. You remember what he said?
Do I remember what he said when he had to leave? No, just something about he had to get home.
Okay.
I mean, once again, we were shocked that we weren't spending the day together that day.
And I think you said that you offered to take at least the babies.
Actually tried to get him to let us take the two small ones, not the ones that were in school because we knew they were in school, but the babies that weren't in school, let us take them home with us because he was going to be coming in.
Because he was going to come visit for Labor Day.
Yes. And he says, Grandma, I can't be without my babies. You know, he says, I drove every weekend when Dad had them to see them. He says, I can't be without my babies.
If you would have thought there was something wrong with him and he was a threat to the children, you would have taken those babies then and there, wouldn't you?
Yes.
All five.
Yes.
Do you remember having a telephone conversation with a doctor named Dr. Frierson, who's the court-appointed psychiatrist?
Yes.
A phone conversation with him?
I don't remember what it was about, but I remember him calling me. I think it was something about this paper here.
I think you're probably right.
Right. It was just a very short conversation. And he's the one that actually let me know that it was the 3rd of August that I was there, because I seemed to keep thinking that it was like a week before all this, but it wasn't that.
And he noticed that in his report?
Yes, he did.
He wrote down, and you tell me if this is true, talking about you, Ms. Thornsberry reports that as a child, Tim's father spoiled him beyond recognition.
Oh, yes, he was very spoiled.
You told Dr. Frierson that your grandson, Tim, was a good child and did not get in much trouble.
True.
You have no knowledge of him ever doing anything to harm himself.
No.
And in fact, he's got you quoted. You tell me if this is true. He would never do that. He loved himself to death.
Yeah, he would never hurt himself. But I never thought he would ever hurt his children either.
Yes, ma'am. The plan was that he was going to come where for Labor Day? He and the
To
children?
his fathers,
To where?
with the children, his fathers, into my house.
In Mississippi?
Yes.
State's Exhibit 77 in evidence has some communications off of Tim's phone. And there's some things from you on the morning of the 28th, which would have been that Thursday. There's a call from you to him that lasts about 8 minutes and 53 seconds. Do you remember what that call was about?
No.
would it have, I'm asking, could it have been about him coming to see you all for Labor Day, or
It could have been, yes.
how often did you all talk?
We talked about 2-3 times a week, maybe. Sometimes more, sometimes less.
Did you text as well, or usually talk?
We did text. We would text occasionally.
So you would talk 2 or 3 times a week and then text in between? Was he always good about answering you?
He actually called me all the time. I never really had to initiate the calls. I got calls from him
He called you?
constantly. Yes, he called me a lot.
Okay.
He called his grandfather a lot. Didn't always just talk to me. Sometimes he would call and just talk to his grandpa.
If you did call him or text him, he'd respond then?
Yes.
I know his records show that on Friday, the 29th in the afternoon, starting around 2 o'clock, there was a series of probably 7 or 8 calls from you.
I was worried
Why were you worried?
because he wasn't answering my call. And that was unusual.
Well, I guess that's when from the records, you all had talked Thursday morning. Was a normal day he would have called you on Friday?
Yeah,
When was
he would have called me. Pardon me?
When were they supposed to come down?
They were supposed to be leaving Friday morning
They were
and
supposed-
coming to our house, yes.
So he was supposed to be driving in.
Right.
What time did you expect him to be there?
I expected him to probably be there by, 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
And when he didn't show, that's when you began your.
Right. And when I couldn't get in touch with him, I was petrified that he'd been in an accident or something. Why isn't he answering my calls?
It looks like there's another missed call. So you had several around 2:30. And then you tried again around 4:13, and then there's actually a 31-second call where he says, it looks like that he connected to you. I don't know if it left a message or you actually.
I left a message probably.
No, this would have been him calling you.
He could have left me a message.
Do you remember any messages that he left?
No, not on Friday, no.
And it continues on for you trying to get in touch with him and him not answering. And then you sent text, where are you? Are you getting my messages? And you're worried.
Yes. The same way you'd be worried if any kid was traveling and then all of a sudden you don't hear and you're not hearing from them.
Yes, ma'am. And then it looks like late in the evening on the 29th at 6:40, he sends you a text that says, sorry, tied up today, not going to be able to make it today. Do you remember getting that text?
I do.
And in fact, he responded back that says, call me please, what's going on, sweetheart, call me. And he didn't call.
No.
And you kept texting him, worried about him, worried about the children.
Yes.
And he doesn't respond.
No.
Never did he.
The next thing I heard was on Wednesday, my husband was in Birmingham at an auto auction and my phone rang and it was the principal or either the assistant principal at the children's school. And they told me that the kids had not showed up at school. And that was just unusual, for little Tim. So then I knew then something was wrong. So I called my son, and that's when my son, I think, in return, called the police there. And I also called a gentleman at his work. The principal gave me the number to a friend of his at work that he worked with. And I called, and they said he hadn't been in at work.
One last question, ma'am. If your grandson would have called you and said I need you to come pick up 4 of my children. Something happened to Natan. What would you have done?
I would have been right there.
Thank you, Randy.
All right. Just one last question I wanted to ask.
Okay.
You told Mr. Graham how happy you and Larry were to see Timmy and the kids in Atlanta, right?
Yes.
Had it been a long time since Timmy had come to visit?
Yes.
About how long?
It had been the Christmas before that, I think in 2012 or something.
Christmas of 2012?
Yeah, it'd been over a year because we'd never seen Elaine.
Right. And so it would have been almost, I guess, a year and a half since you'd seen him.
Somewhere in that area.
And that, since you'd seen him or any of the babies.
Right.
And just, you don't have to go into a lot of detail, but what happened in the Christmas of 2012 in Mississippi that stopped his normal, regular visitation?
Came to my house for Christmas and, he wasn't happy. He just seemed miserable or something, and I don't know what happened after he left and went back to my son's. But my son told me the next morning, he says, Mom, he wanted to argue, and I told him I wasn't arguing with him, and he just took the kids and he left.
He left in the middle of the night?
Left in the night. He didn't even come and say goodbye or anything.
Do you know whether Timmy and Big Tim communicated during that year and a half?
I'm not quite sure if they did or not. I know Timmy called me a lot during that time, but he never came to see us or anything, but we talked on the phone.
Yes, ma'am.
That was the time when he wasn't probably talking to his dad, so he talked to me.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much, Mr. Thornsberry.
All right, you may step down, Mr. Thornsberry.
I think it's with me.
Give that
Need this?
It's a
Right,
copy
Mr.
of her. She wants it. She can keep
you can leave
it.
it.
Or I'll take it from her.
Oh, a quick break. Okay, you want to call on the witness? Keep going. All right, call witness.
Detective Brian Travis.
Raise your right hand, please. You swear to affirm the testimony you give in court is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Have a seat over there, please. If you'll state your name and spell your last name.
Brian Travis, Travis.
Detective Travis, where are you employed?
I'm employed at the Lexington County Sheriff's Department.
Judge and I would ask to be able to lead under 611C.
Sure.
Sorry, Your Honor.
He has to be,
I asked to lead under 611C.
Shown himself to be hostile.
all out.
How long have you worked at Lexington County?
I've been employed there for 12 years.
And what is your position there?
I'm a detective assigned to the Criminal Intelligence Unit as a criminal intelligence analyst.
And so is that your only law enforcement experience?
I've been at the Sheriff's Department the whole time. I've served many different roles in the Sheriff's Department.
And what is your position now?
As I said, I'm a detective in the Criminal Intelligence Unit, and so my actual position is a criminal intelligence analyst.
Can you tell the jury what a criminal intelligence analyst does?
Sure. So intelligence is just information. And so when you look at criminal intelligence, it's information about crimes. And so my job as a criminal intelligence analyst is to take the information that's provided about crimes and the people that commit them and to create actionable plans and patterns and recognition, things like that for them.
And you kind of, within that criminal intelligence area, you kind of have a specialty?
I mostly deal with communications analysis and geographic location analysis. So people using phones, cell phones specifically, and then where their locations are from that.
And can you take that data and you analyze it? Can you also utilize that in mapping?
I do.
Judge, at this point in time, we would offer him as an expert in cellular analysis and mapping.
Board Dyer, please.
Not on that, Your Honor.
Arch. Detective can offer opinions as to cellular data, cell phone, and mapping thereof.
Did you have an occasion to become involved in this case?
I did.
Was that, you were asked, I guess, by Captain Fossum to begin collecting and analyzing some information?
He's been my captain the whole time. I honestly, at this point, don't remember if he specifically started or if it was the Major Crimes Unit. But my help was requested in the case back in 2014.
And initially, you're provided phone numbers and I guess maybe some associated names with those phone numbers, correct?
Generally, yes.
And you were able to use some online search material that's available to you to gather some additional information?
So I have both what's provided to me, both through the cell phone records or any report information. I do use open source intelligence when available. And then I have several computer system programs that we have that are utilized for doing the analysis and the mapping.
And I think you were given some of Tim's T-Mobile phone records, is that correct?
Correct.
Wasn't there kind of a snafu initially about maybe a couple of numbers being transposed, or?
That I couldn't tell you about. That might have happened before the records were given to me.
And you were asked to make a hot list, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell the jury what a hot list is?
So when you're looking at generally anything, but specifically in this case in cellular records, a hot list is going to be who the person is speaking to the most over that span of records. It's generally considered the top 10 or so. And so you look at a call frequency, how often did these two phone numbers talk to each other? And then it counts those out. And so you'll have a phone number and an amount of transactions between them.
And were you able to take those numbers that you developed into that hot list and kind of put names and associate those?
I think almost all of them we were able to associate to someone or a business.
And at some point in time, did you receive copies of receipts that came out of Tim's car?
Yes.
And were you able to take those cell phone records that you have and those receipts and create a timeline?
I was.
Let me show you what's been marked as defense. Exhibit for ID 212.
It looks like
212. Is that the timeline that you created?
it's one of them.
And is that a fair and accurate representation of that timeline?
Yes.
And I think initially, well, Judge, at this point in time, we would move defense to 212 into evidence.
No objection.
212 timeline cell phones, accept without objection.
I think initially, when you did it, you had the cellular data and then also the receipts, but then you received some banking information after that and kind of added that onto here, correct?
So that timeline started off as kind of a working product. We had a big piece of paper, and we're kind of handwriting a lot of information in. So it looked at the cell phone location we had, it looked at some of the receipts we had, and then it also looked at the financial transactions from bank records that were returned.
And I think when I asked you or told you that I was going to ask you about this, I think you looked at it the other night and found a few errors and had corrected those.
Correct.
This is kind of large. Let me show. I'm gonna have you just kind of go over once I put it on the overhead. But can you just kind of explain to the jury, you know, what are they just kind of seeing here?
So it's pretty much at the time, the most basic timeline I could have created. And so from the left side of the paper moving towards right, it moves from the oldest date towards the newest date. And so then any place we were able to put a location to, we put on there in sequential order.
So it just kind of follows all the way down.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're starting, I guess, on the 28th, is that correct?
Correct.
And then it appears the first thing you have is a call from Amber Jones on the 28th in Lexington, South Carolina, correct?
That's the first one that's on that one, yes.
And then the next one is also another Lexington, South Carolina call from Amber.
Correct.
And then because of space limitations, you have to jump sometimes up and sometimes below, but just putting those sequentially, correct?
So I used a program called Microsoft Visio to make that. And basically, it automatically did that for me to fit the timeline.
And so the next thing that you had was on the 29th at the Exxon in Lexington, South Carolina.
Correct.
And these up here indicate that those are calls. Would this down here indicate that it was not a call and maybe a receipt?
Correct. In that specific case, it was definitely from a receipt that was found in the vehicle.
And you denote those on there if they are from, say, a call or from some of those cellular analysis or those phone records you received, correct? And so the next then on the 29th, I believe, is at the Mountain Express in Thompson, Georgia. Is that correct? And then we follow up a call from Lithonia, Georgia to Zamzam, and that's also on the 29th?
Yep.
And then we've got one right here. Let's see if I can get it. It's got two lines and they kind of intersect, both of them on the 29th, and both of them appear to be calls. What does it mean that the line that it's showing that it's intersecting before it's kind of hitting the timeline?
It's just the way the program, because the times are so close, it's just the way the program did it. Because when you look at the whole span of the timeline, you're talking, I think it was 9 days. And so it's got to fit enough blocks in there for 24 hours a day times 9 days. So it just compresses everything. So because the calls were only about a minute apart, if you were able to zoom in all the way down, really, really small, you would see a minute space between them. But when it prints out like that, it just looks like it's all one line.
I got you. And that says call to Cook Springs, Alabama. So that means that phone is in Cook Spring, Alabama when they received the call from, I guess, Roberta Thornsberry?
Correct.
So then we jump down to the bottom and again on 29th. This time it's at the Marathon gas station in Birmingham, Alabama.
Correct.
It appears then on the 29th, we are in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and that appears to be a call.
Correct.
And then on the 29th, Lithia Springs, Georgia, and that is a call also?
Correct.
And then we are next on the, again on the 29th, at Bumper, to bumper in Washington, Georgia.
Correct.
So that is not a call. That's based on some kind of documentation
Correct.
you received. And then we've got one here on 8:30 in Lexington, and then below on 8:30 at Lexington, and it appears that those are about a minute apart. And is that what you said? That those, if you got down kind of microscopic, there might be a small little thing, but because of the pixelation and that, it looks like it's kind of intersecting, but those
Correct.
are two different
Because
times.
they're so close together, you can't see a separation.
And then it looks like there's a space here on the 31st to the 1st, so you don't have anything for that time period, correct? And then the next thing that we see is on the 1st at the Citco in Clinton, South Carolina, correct?
Correct.
And then we jump down again on the 1st at the Dunkin' Donuts in Spartanburg, South Carolina.
Correct.
And then we go to the top in Winsboro on the 1st, and that is a call from Winsboro to Christina Elke.
That is right.
That has a time associated with it. And then we're down at the bottom on the 1st in a call in Lugoff from Amanda Jones. So she has called his phone, and that's where it's hitting, is in Lugoff.
Correct.
And then it looks like we jump to the next day, and on 9/2 at the Kangaroo in Folly Beach.
Correct.
And then later on 9/2, we're at West Columbia at the Quick Pantry.
Correct.
And then later in 9/2 in Aiken.
Correct.
And then at the racetrack on 9/2 in Athens, Georgia. And then I guess we jump another call, and this is on 9/2, and this is in Lawrenceville, Georgia.
Correct.
And then later in 9/2 in Macon, Georgia. And then there's another one below it that's also Macon. And then I think that there's also one down kind of at the bottom from Macon, and those kind of look like they intersect, but they're just the
Correct.
spacing. And then on 9/3, we're at the Walmart in West Columbia,
Yes.
followed up on 9/3 at the Sunoco in Casey.
Yes.
And then later on 9/3 at the Advanced Auto Parts in Lake City.
Correct.
And then we jump to the next day, Charleston. I think that kind of intersects with another call showing that that's in Charleston.
Yes, it does.
And then at Blue Water Exxon in Mount Pleasant on 9/4.
So just to clarify that point, back in 2014, we thought it was in Mount Pleasant. Later on, we learned that we couldn't place an exact location as to where that was, other than it's somewhere in the Charleston County area.
Okay. But then we know later on 9/4 in Camden, buying
Correct.
gas. And then later that same day at the Dollar General in Orangeburg.
Correct.
And then in Lexington on 9/4.
Correct.
And then we jump to the 5th, and we're in Louisville, Georgia.
Correct.
And that appears to be the only thing on the 5th. And then 9/6 in Greenville, Alabama at the Bypass Food Mart.
Correct.
And then at a bank in Camden, Alabama on the 6th.
Correct.
And then a Taco Bell in Laurel, Mississippi.
Correct.
And so the timeline goes from August 28th to September 6th.
Correct.
And just kind of looking from beginning to end and jumping all around. There didn't appear to be any kind of pattern or reason that someone would be from one area to the next and back and forth, does there?
When you take into the totality of the information that, if you look at only locations, it could be a bit confusing, but when you look at the context of what gave us those locations, almost every one of those locations appears to be goal-driven. There was a specific thing he was trying to get to or do at that time, and then his plans changed. I can't say what changed his plans, but we were given lots of information since that timeline was made.
That's all the questions I have.
Break. All right, need a break. Step in the jury room, and back in a few minutes, we'll talk about the case.